Okay, last time we left off working on the front of the building, and I'd worked a little bit in the meantime. The facade of the elder part of the library is done for the most part. I might have to go back over it and darken up parts of it. Right now I'm pretty happy with it. What I'm going to do now today is work on the side of the building, trying to darken up to make it a correspondingly dark side. It's probably going to be the side building where the sun's not hitting. I don't think it usually hits any time of the day, obviously, because the sun rises behind it. So here we go. We're going to start. Actually, the first thing I do is put some dark underneath this part of the eave. So I darken up part of the existing. So I'm going to put a couple of dots that make for shade, a little bit of stipple. What I like to do is, obviously I don't like using, we have to use stipple to make shade. We're not using anything else. We're not watercoloring. This is strictly line or dot. So underneath the eaves, I'm going to put little bits of dot to correspond for shade. We could make solid black, go for serious darkness. So I'm probably going to do that for parts of the underlying structure. I might do that on my own at a later time. I don't want to go too dark and be sorry I did that later. So here we go. I'm just putting in little bits of stipple. I think the facade looks pretty good. It's kind of hard. Again, you're making a black and white structure out of something that's in color. You have to take the corresponding information and make it into something that's black and white. It's very difficult to do that. And in lesser hands, it could be dangerous. So I did basically the same thing with all these. I darkened up or left light the ones I thought would be that way. Now this particular section of the building we're going to work on today, it's the same type of information. Different parts of the facade are going to be light or dark. But because no light hits it, we're going to have to make the entire piece darker. So that's another trick. You're talking about the same type of information as the front, but it's going to have to be generally darkened just to give the illusion that it's a far side of the building. If I made it the same amount of information, the same type of dark, it would look pretty silly. It would not work. The trick would be gone. It would be lost. And I like to show a little bit of difference. So here we go. First part, though, of the building is this. You have to draw underneath the eave. And the trick there is, again, to show that light is not entering that part of the building. And you have to kind of show that. You have to emulate the fact that there is, it's underneath a section of the building where you're creating a type of dimension. If you left it black and white, it would look pretty silly. It wouldn't work. And again, because it's a color situation and we're doing it black and white, we reduce to making it strictly black and white. It's very difficult. We're almost done with this particular section. I'm also going to do the roof. If you notice, I did little sections of the slate on top. And I did that. I kind of also illustrated that in a black and white type of thinking, translated to black and white. I kind of came up with my own little way of doing the slates on top. I could have been really 100% correct and did the roofing exactly as I see it. That would have been so difficult. So I came up with my own type of thinking, my own little translation of it. It's still difficult. It's just not as difficult as it was. We're almost done with the roofing, or the eaves of the particular section. I have lots of things to correct on here. For instance, the gutter has to be resolved better. I just did a quick translation of it, and it's going to be done differently. Every bit of work that you see here is not just a matter of putting the information down and being happy with it. There's little different tricks along the way that pop up. It's not a simple matter of just plopping down information and being happy with it. But it'd be so easy if it was that way. And we have to really resolve different ways of showing the sides of a gutter. And just because it works on one side of the building doesn't mean it's going to correspond perfectly on the other side. There are differences. All right, that looks pretty good. And even then, at the very end, when I do all this, I'm probably still have to go one more time and correct certain things, make certain amendments to that piece. Okay, this is the far side. The sun never enters this side, so it's going to be darker than this side. Here we go, folks. I'm going to make it first just as dark as some of these are, but in the end, they're going to make them darker still. And the ink is not working. There it goes. That's another little trick. Sometimes the rapidograph just doesn't want to work. It doesn't matter what manufacturer it is, it just happens. And you have to coax the ink to work. It doesn't matter, again, what particular brand you're working with, it happens to both. There's actually 3 major brands, and all 3 have that unfortunate capability of stalling on you. It's like a car that just doesn't want to start the first time you put the key in the ignition. It doesn't always want to work. And I'm pretty good with my rapidographs. I clean them. I make sure that they're loaded with ink. It just happens. They're like anything that's man-made, you have little flaws. Again, this section of the building, we have to indicate that it's darker. So what we have to do is darken up pieces of it as we go along. I already kind of outlined each one of these sections. And the trick is to make each individual section either lighter or darker. They can't always be the same. That would be boring, and the trick would not work. As it is, the trick is working pretty good. We have to translate each section into a different looking piece of color. And I did that simply by more stipple or less stipple. Hopefully it'll do the trick. Right now I'm pretty much going to make it an equal amount of stipple, and later on I'll darken each one as it deems to be appropriate. So basically I'm starting off with an equal amount of information. When I'm all done and I look back at all this, I could darken up as needed. We have an eave situation here too. Pretty much like what we had here, but darker still. Because not only is it just strictly underneath the roof, it is now darker still because of the fact it's on the far side of the building. We have to keep these things in mind. It's not going to be the same situation as this. It's going to be darker still. All these little situations, just these little bits of differences have to be translated. You have to show viewers that there is a difference. If you don't show these, if you don't show the corresponding differences, the entire trick of making this building is lost. And that's part of this this drawing. It's kind of a trick. I'm going to make parts of this lighter now because I can do it. It's no longer completely underneath the eave, so I'm going to make some of this lighter. Now, actually, it's a little bit early to do that, so I'm going to wait till the very end. But I'm keeping it in mind. I'm already starting the fact that I want to keep parts of this lighter, especially the mortar between each one of these brickings. So I'm keeping that in mind already. If you notice the mortar between each one of these bricks, I'm leaving a little bit light. It's exact opposite of what the actual picture will indicate, but I have to create that effect. Otherwise it would look, actually the mortar is a tad darker than each one of these bricks. So what I'm doing is I'm creating my own little thinking here. I'm creating my own little language. And sometimes you have to do that to make this work. To make something like this work, you have to almost make your own little method of working each section into a new language. It's not as, I hate to say this, but a lot of people think drawing is one of the simpler arts. And it's really not that simple. You have to, almost for something like a building, you're creating a whole different way of creating almost, let's say, a language for the way it's going to be indicated. It's not a simple matter of just drawing in a building. It'd be so nice if it was just so simple. To make it work, you have to almost come up with a little formula for making it understandable. So we have a nice little section started already. And right now, they're all pretty much the same amount of information. They're all pretty much even. They're dark. Not quite darker than these, but they're evenly dark. When I'm all set, when I have the entire section done, at that point I could actually darken it up altogether. I actually should have, at this point, jumped to this pen. This one tends to be a little bit thicker. I'm not going to say which brand is better or worse. It's just that this one, the ink comes out in a thicker grouping. And I should have done that to begin with. It would have been easier for me to actually have and it's the same size pen. It's not that it's a different size pen. They're both the same. You get to know your pens after a while. And even if it's the same size, the fact that it's a different manufacturer can make a different amount of ink coming out. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. You can see it right now. The ink is coming out a little bit thicker. It's the same size, 0.25. And yet, if you notice, it's coming out just a bit thicker. Hard to believe. But a simple thing is a different manufacturer can make a different size pen. It's not supposed to be that way in a real world. And it really doesn't matter because this is the far side of the building. So we don't really need to keep that similar like this would be similar. We don't need to keep that same mystique. We could always make it a little bit darker. It'll work fine. I know this seems a little bit boring, but at this point of the drawing, I have to keep the similarity very, very equal. I've done so much of this building. It's going to be even more so when we get to this far side, because those bricks are exactly even. There is not going to be any difference between each brick. Where we have differences in this facade, we have no differences in that. That one's going to be almost boring, and I hate to say that, but that's the way it is with modern architecture. Modern architecture is very boring. The old style architecture was fantastic. You had so much little deviance, little change. It was just beautiful. Modern architecture, for all its glory, is very boring. At least from an artistic point of view. At least from the point of view of translation, it's pretty boring. So already I can see just a slight difference in the amount of ink this particular manufacturer comes up with. You might not notice it. You probably say to yourself, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a difference, but I noticed it. Just a tad, of a very small essence, but it's just a little bit different. I could always see the difference between that and this. There is just a little bit of difference. I have to hold myself back. I'm already seeing that I'm making it a little bit too different. And I don't want to do that. I don't want it to look like part of this is too drastically different than the rest. That is already going to affect the drawing in the end, and I don't want it to be affected in that respect. Again, this side's beginning to look pretty much the same. I will make a difference being more noticeable as I go along. When we work under the eaves on this side of the building, it's going to be really obvious. But can't do that yet. A lot of this is a question of subtlety. And the question really is going to be achieving that subtlety and keeping the effect obvious. It cannot be too obvious, and yet it's got to be very, very obvious. Especially in the long run, when you're looking at this at a distance, it's going to be really noticeable to me. And maybe there's one or two people out there who are going to notice it and say, hey, I see the difference. Those are the ones I'm really working this drawing to. There's going to be some people who just simply be amused by it. But there are one or two people, maybe an architect, maybe somebody who just knows drawing really good. Those are the ones you really have to base your drawing towards, because they're the ones that are going to look at this and critique it properly. They're going to say, hey, you know your stuff. I mean, in the long run, it's going to look good anyway. But there are always going to be the guys out there who know their stuff. And those are the ones you really have to be careful of. All right. Having done this, I'm going to go back to the other pen. And I'm going to try to make some of these a little bit lighter. And again, it dried on me. Just a matter of seconds. There we go. It's one of the tough things about rapidograph. Everybody thinks that they're pretty easy, but they all have their own individual little effect. And I know a lot of guys who use rapidograph for cartooning, and it gets to the point where they talk to their pens. I'm not at that point yet. I'm pretty good in the sense that I'm able to use a rapidograph for a number of months. And some people go through them in a course of 1 month per pen. Mine lasts, I've had good luck, some of these pens last for a number of years. I'm very careful. I clean them. I re-ink them. I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapidograph are clean. And I make sure the actual front and back of the rapid And I do that on the average of once a week. I know some people who, when they experience the minute there's a clog, they simply throw it away and buy a new one. I'm a frugal Yankee, and I can't afford to do that. And these things are going to be very expensive. It's like $20 for a single pen now. It doesn't make much sense to buy a new pen every time there's a clog. I'd rather go out and clean it, buy the stuff to clean it, and just develop a nice rapport with your tool. If you really understand it, it'll help you. When I was in college, I had a teacher who taught me sculpture. He was a Swedish guy. And sculpture is a lot different than drawing, but he always said that you have to develop a little rapport with your tools. And you have to keep them sharp. It'll keep you sharp. And I feel the same way about any type of pen, any type of pencil. You have to develop a kind of rapport between you and the tools you use. And I think it's a wonderful idea. You take care of them, they'll take care of you. We live in a day and age where we simply get new stuff the moment we feel, it's so much easier just to buy a new tool. I'm not that way. I don't think it's a good idea. Sometimes you really do have to hold on to your tools and just take care of them. Develop a nice relationship. Now again, if you notice, this is all looking the same. Once we look back at this, I'm not going to do it till we look back and have a good section of it done. At that point, we're going to go back and individualize each one of the markings. We might make a darker section, we might make a lighter section. But we have to do that carefully. We just don't simply do it. So we really have to be careful about this. Nice section. Already you can see a little bit of developing. And you laugh at yourself. You say, my God, he's only got 1 inch of it done. A drawing like this, that's the way it works. You don't expect it to be done. And I know we're living in an age where we expect stuff to be immediate. We want immediate gratification. This is not that type of piece of artwork. This is not a gesture drawing. This is a fine piece of artwork, and I really expect the type of effect that's done in time. We live in an age where this type of handiwork is not appreciated, but I still do it. It's difficult because I am a walking dinosaur in a land of machinery. But I do appreciate the way these things work and the way they look. And I understand it's difficult. It's difficult when you put your stuff in a contest against things that are just slapped together at the last minute and you lose. Because people will look at it and say, my God, it's just so overworked. It's difficult, but you have to last. You have to keep your own attitude throughout. Every now and then there's somebody who will look at it and say, my God, look at that amount of work. And they'll appreciate it. It's getting to be where it's rare. But I think in the long run, if you hold on to your attitude, you'll be rewarded. Okay, so we have a nice section of this area done. We haven't really addressed the fact that we have individualized each section. We're not there yet. We have to do the entire piece. before we could actually do that, before we could actually take individual sections. It looks pretty good. We have a nice section of it done. Later on, you'll be able to see how I individualize sections of it. Right now, it really looks dramatically similar. But right now, I'm not interested in really individualizing sections so much as I want it to look like it's dramatically the same. What we'll do is we'll individualize sections at a later date, and you'll be able to see what I did. Actually, I'm very glad at the direction we're going. We haven't, you got to be very careful not to overdo it or underdo it. And it works pretty good so far. The thing to really notice is that they're not perfectly even. There's a contrast in the way the facade is actually put together. And I think we managed to retain that. So I'd say we got a good third of it looking just right. And we haven't really made it darker yet as an entire section. So we have two things we have to do. We have to individualize each one of these parts of the facade and as a whole darken the whole piece. Two things to look for. Not to mention there's going to be a difference in this whole section anyway. And guaranteed they're all very subtle. But I like the way it's going to look. I get sense that it's going to look good.